Embracing vulnerability is powerful. Let's talk about it. What's up, y'all? My name is Elia. I'm a mindset coach and I share tips to encourage anyone who may struggle with feeling seen. So, vulnerability is one of these things that tends to get a negative connotation associated with it because to be vulnerable, you have to be open or exposed to threat, uncertainty, and risk. And that's scary. So, for a lot of people, being vulnerable also feels like being weak. And people conflate the two, but being vulnerable and embracing vulnerability is actually a major advantage if you're just willing to take some emotional risks. And it comes with a host of benefits. Embracing vulnerability, again, it is a strength because it opens you up to new opportunities. It opens you up to deeper, richer, more fulfilling, and more intimate relationships because you're connecting on true values and things that really matter to you at your core versus just surface level pleasantries or keeping people around just for the sake of keeping people around. And embracing that vulnerability, it almost forces you in a way, and I'll say strongly encourages you to get a clear sense of yourself. So that way you know who you are and you then present that self fully to the world authentically. And that allows you to live a more authentic life, which allows you to access joy because you accept yourself fully. So it's easier to tap into joy in everyday life because you're not constantly worried about how you'll be received or whether people like you or whether you're accepted. Don't get me wrong, those things to some degree they are important and we all think about them regardless of how much we say we don't. But when you embrace vulnerability, being accepted and being liked, those aren't necessarily make or break things for you because you have that clear sense of yourself. And having that clear sense of self, that boosts your confidence, it boosts your courage, it boosts your resilience because you're able to then deal with rejection, you're able to deal with loss, deal with fear, deal with failure, if you will, and come back to that sense of self and still be willing to be vulnerable because you know that the opportunities that comes with that outweigh the risks, especially when you're careful and prudent in when and how you're vulnerable. And all of this has a big impact on the relationship that you develop with shame, because again, by embracing that vulnerability and embracing that authenticity, it's really hard for then somebody to shame you for who you are because you know who you are, you know who you're not, and you're the one who chose to be open to the risk, open to the threat. So it's a lot harder to use things against you to tear you down when you really embrace vulnerability and stand in that sense of self and stand in that authenticity. So it's really important to be willing to be open, take these emotional risks, be vulnerable, especially when it's clear that there might actually be something fruitful that comes out of it. And with all that said, it is still important to not be, I don't want to say careless in vulnerability, but to be vulnerable with caution and with some discernment attached to it. You can't necessarily be vulnerable in the same way in every situation because different situations, different relationships, different settings are going to require different things from you and also come with different opportunities or just give you a different level of room. So you also have to have some discernment in when, where, and how vulnerable you are because that is going to play an impact in your overall quality of life. And again, certain scenarios, you might have to shift how you show up to some degree or just be a little bit more prudent in how much information you put out there and how much of yourself you give to something. So, vulnerability is one of those things I highly champion. It's something that continue to work on for myself. It's transformed my life, and even me making these videos is a form of me being vulnerable. Personally, I don't like being on camera. I'm pretty uncomfortable with it. I don't like really being in the spotlight or just kind of getting a lot of attention. So, for me, this is an experience of vulnerability because hey, I can really get my feelings hurt. But by willing to be vulnerable and be out there, I guess, in some sense. This is me practicing what I preach. So, like you, I continue to do the work every day. It's an ongoing journey. My goal here is to humanize this stuff. So, with that said, I want to share a few tips that have and continue to help me in hopes that they'll help you on your journey. First, it's important to be willing to see vulnerability as a selective advantage. I know that sounds simple, but it's really a mindset shift. You have to start with the willingness to actually see vulnerability as an advantage and not just a disadvantage as we've often been conditioned to see it as. Secondly, it's really important to explore yourself, explore your fears, get a good idea of your aptitudes and limitations, and be very honest with yourself about what those are so that you have that clear sense of self. So when you're in situations, you know where your boundaries are and you know what you can do, you know what you can't do. You have an idea of what might work and what probably won't work for you. And then it's important to and seek growth over comfort or acceptance. Again, being vulnerable comes with some real risks. You might get your feelings hurt. People might not like you. You might get rejected. You might feel like you failed at certain things. You might feel embarrassment. All of these things are risks that come with being vulnerable. But again, the idea of vulnerability and embracing vulnerability is that it opens up new doors for deeper, richer connections, more genuine connections, a more rich and authentic way of living life. So the idea is that the growth that comes through embracing vulnerability will outweigh the comfort or the acceptance of just being liked just for the sake of being liked. So it's important to really focus on the growth, especially in the moments of the discomfort and pain or embarrassment that being vulnerable might come with. And then it's important, really important, to reflect without judgment. Again, it's not always going to work in your favor. So sometimes there will be perceived failures. You will feel rejection. You will feel a sense of loss at times. All of those are phenomenal teachers. Yeah, they kind of hurt. So I'm not going to say those things won't and don't hurt. They will and do. They're very uncomfortable. It's not pleasant. And every negative situation still comes with some potential lesson, some potential opportunity, some potential takeaway. So it's important to reflect on the entire process without judgment, without being overly critical of yourself, but being compassionate and being willing to kind of pull out those lessons or things you can take forward as constructive growth tools from any and all instances of loss, failure, or just discomfort along the way. So I hope those tips do help you on your journey. And as always, I want to leave you with one reflective question. And today's question is, how might your life improve if you gave yourself permission to truly embrace vulnerability? Think about it.